That's right, YouTube. I'm back, here once again to ramble to you about anime for upwards of 10 minutes with my shitty microphone and pitched up voice. Once again, I'll be discussing Jujutsu Kaisen. In my last video, I said I could make countless hours of video talking about what parts of JJK I actually do like, so now I'm gonna actually attempt to deliver on that by doing a straight analysis instead of a critique. Specifically, I'll be talking about themes of family and how they're shown in a series like JJK. In all truth, it's kind of impossible to write a story where any two characters are related without having family affected in some way. You don't even have to show a character's family members, they can even just be a motivator for them. But JJK stands out to me in how it depicts family because of how it explores both blood relations and chosen family dynamics in a nuanced way. There are a great variety of characters who choose to split off from the people they are blood related to, as well as those who entirely devote themselves to their family without question. I think looking at the way these characters are written is necessary to craft a thesis on what Akutami is trying to say about family in his story, and how it reflects on the themes of JJK as a whole. I'll be talking about a handful of characters whose relationships contribute to the building of these themes. Unfortunately, because of how I'm structuring this, there's not any real way to prevent spoilers for people who haven't read the manga. The only part I can guarantee will be spoiler-free is the first section where I'll talk about the protagonist, as I'm going to return to him and talk about how his family develops in the length of the series. So if you haven't yet read it, then I recommend you go do that before watching this. I'll still be here when you're done. One more thing, try to take this analysis with a grain of salt. While Akutami is really good at writing character interactions, JJK is still a shonen series, so inevitably there's going to be more of a focus on the fighting and power system. Because of this, a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is just going to be based on deduction and side content like the light novels. But without further ado, let's talk about... If you don't know who Yuji Itadori is, well, honestly, it's probably because you're my friend and I forced you to watch this. Sorry, Mason. Itadori is the protagonist. He's kind, energetic, and has genuine motivation to do good and help others. At the start of the stories, we don't know a lot of his family outside of his relationship with his paternal grandfather, Wasuke. This changes as we get later into the story, but I'll return to that at the end of the video. When we are first introduced to Yuji, he lives alone because his only living relative and the man that raised him, Wasuke, is in the hospital. Wasuke is standoffish but cares about his grandson, shown in the way he insists against Yuji visiting him and tells him to participate more in his school clubs. We only get one scene with him, however, before he dies. Yeah, it's true. It's honestly pretty jarring. In his last moments, Wasuke tries to tell Yuji something about his parents, only to be brushed off by him telling him not to talk like he's about to die. Wasuke then tells his grandson to use his strength to help others in the time he has left, and not to end up dying alone like he did. Those are his last words to Yuji. While they seem pretty unremarkable, these words end up becoming the basis for Yuji's actions throughout the entire rest of the series. He internalizes this notion of saving people to an almost unhealthy degree. We first see this when the memory of those words is what guides Yuji to go into the school in the first place and help Megumi retrieve Sukuna's finger and save his friends. Even in the scene where he's doing exactly that, he describes those words as a pesky curse that has been put onto his back already. Yuji brings up these last words when Yaga asks him why he wants to be a sorcerer, and he actually berates him for forming the basis of risking his life and choosing this path on just someone else's words. He even points out how it doesn't matter if it's a family member when Yuji brings it up, it's still just someone else. It's only when Yuji ties in this notion of saving others into the fact of his status as Sukuna's vessel that Yaga actually accepts this as the reason to become a sorcerer. And the formation of this ideology is where I truly think he begins paving the way toward his own downfall. Yuji believes that in order to live the fulfilling life that Wasuke wished for him to have, he must consume all of Sukuna's fingers and then die for the sake of the rest of the world. Even though it's too early in the series to say too much about the themes of JJK as a whole, Yuji's relationship to his grandfather already sets up a storyline in which Yuji solidifies his ideology based on the foundation of his grandfather's words. But enough about old Yuji. To start off, let's explore some of the characters whose relationships with others solidify the theme of chosen family, which occurs throughout the length of the series. Before you get your hopes up, I'm unfortunately not going to talk about my girl Nobara much in this video, sorry. We see early on that Megumi gets a short end of the stick in terms of biological family. His mother, who we know to have been a good person, ends up dying shortly after he was born. The theme of actually okay parents dying before they can see their children reach adulthood is recurring, by the way. His father is Toji Zenin, a descendant of the affluent Zenin sorcerer clan who is rejected for having no cursed energy whatsoever. He settled down with Megumi's mother after meeting meeting her and having a child with her, despite him being someone who traveled around doing hired work as a mercenary and didn't settle down too much. After she died, however, he basically abandoned Megami, even forgetting his name, and made a deal to sell him back to the Zenin clan when he reached a certain age because they valued him for his technique. Megami started living with Sumiki, who isn't blood related to him but was a child of a woman Toji was with for a time. Sumiki is still, at this point in the story, the only one he openly acknowledges as a family member he cares about. As someone who cares little about saving random people but devotes himself to those he finds genuinely and honestly good, Megami cares very much about Sumiki. Even if Sumiki had had a curse on her that's left her in a coma for multiple years. He even risks fighting a high-grade curse on his own because he knows it could potentially end up hurting her. This is really the first instance we see of the recurring notion of found family being held above blood family. Sumiki may not be related to Megami, but he cares about her much more than pretty much any of the Zenins. And while step-siblings aren't really the same as family you choose through bonds, you still probably have a mutual relationship to one parent after all. Megami still values Sumiki high above anyone else in his extended or immediate family. Even his cousin Maki, as it's implied he treats her as more of an upperclassman than a cousin. There's also his relationship with Gojo. After Toji abandoned Megami, he took on more roles as an assassin, including one directed at a girl who Gojo was assigned to protect. He ended up killing her, but Gojo killed him after that, and in his last words to him, Toji told him that he had a son who would be sold to the Zenins in a couple of years. Gojo, knowing firsthand how shitty it is to grow up in one of the big clans, gave Megami a choice to become a sorcerer at age 15 and stop the sale with school funding, or to let it happen and guarantee his sister has a tough life. Megami naturally chose the former. While it's never explicitly stated, I don't think it's too far-fetched to say that Gojo is probably the closest thing Megami has to a father figure. It's not like Gojo lived with him and Sumiki or anything, but he did support them financially and at least saw them occasionally. And to two fatherless kids who don't have any other adults consistently in their life, it's kind of inevitable you take on a role somewhat similar to that. Gojo is also someone who Megami is able to consistently rely on, and perhaps the only person in his life who has served that purpose for such a long amount of time. Sumiki basically raised him mostly on her own, but even she ended up becoming cursed and falling into a coma. And while Megami is all about protecting those he cares about, it's obvious that that's not something he needs to worry about with Gojo. Gojo is strong, literally and metaphorically. He's someone Megami can trust to pull through even in dangerous situations. He even places faith on him to save Yuji from being executed. It's for this reason that I wish we could have seen more how Gojo's feeling affected Megami in particular. But whether we see this or not, the rest of how Gojo's relationship with Megami is portrayed still adds to the themes of chosen family in his arc. There's also his relationship with the other first years I have to talk about, but I'll go into that during Gojo's section. Now, let's see who's... No. What the fuck? Wait, no! We've already covered a character who is shown to value his chosen family quite a bit, and the next two I'm going to talk about only continue in establishing this pattern. Gojo is a character whose blood family we never really see or hear about. Of course, we know he comes from the Gojo clan and was honored within the clan for having their most cherished technique, but we hardly ever see what that meant for him growing up. Gojo does help young Megami because he knows that he would be unhappy growing up in the Zenin clan, however, so that does imply he himself didn't have the best childhood. What we do see more of a focus on in his backstory arc is his relationship with his two classmates, Saguri and Shoko. While it's clear he's close to both of them, he has a unique relationship with Saguru, as he is the only one whose strength and power even comes close to matching his own. They even call themselves the strongest. I'll talk more about the path Geto takes in just a bit, but I want to focus on what Gojo chose to do after Saguru defected. They both had the goal of improving the world for future sorcerers, but instead of trying to do something insane like stop the birth of curses entirely, Gojo instead became a teacher and began fostering the strength of the next generation. He even talks about how his goal with becoming a teacher was to raise a group of strong allies with ideals similar to his own. And he talks a lot about how certain students of his could even end up surpassing him someday. While you can interpret this as Gojo being selfish and wanting an easy way to pass the baton of strength, I think this reflects more on how he shows his love for others than anything. The idea of family in Gojo's mind is someone who he can trust to bear the burden of strength alongside him. Just look at his relationship with Saguru. And even going past that, you can't deny that Gojo really does care about his students, even beyond just him having the expectation of them becoming stronger. He shows this in moments like in the end of the second chapter in the light novel, and I'm not trying to act like that's somehow required reading for analysis of the series, I know it's supplementary, when he admits that he wants Nanami to look after Yuji for a little while because he knows he's more equipped to deal with emotions in adolescence. Or delaying the execution of two teens and going directly against the authority of the higher-ups to do so. Even more glaringly is when he makes it clear that his students can rely on him. While it may seem boastful of him to constantly say things like, "I'm the strongest," that line has a deeper weight behind it when used to reassure his students that he's got everything under control. All this aside, you don't take the job of being a sorcerer teacher without knowing that you're going to have to be a reliable adult figure in their life, especially the fact that a lot of them don't have parents. He even acts kind of like an older brother figure to a lot of the kids, even those who don't really match his energy. Geto is the last character I'm going to talk about who fits this mold of putting his found family above his blood relatives, and probably the most extreme example of a character who does this. We know that Geto was raised by non-sorcerer parents, but we don't know exactly what his relationship to them was like. He does end up killing these parents shortly after defecting in order to prove his point of hating all non-sorcerers. It would make more sense if Geto's parents were just awful pieces of shit and he was actually just looking for an excuse to kill them all along. But I choose to believe that his parents were actually decent people, as that works better thematically in my opinion. Sure, some of Geto's hate was justified, as it was probably difficult to grow up seeing and living with curses when none of his family understood what it was he was scared of. But Geto's parricide represents a deeper turning point in his character. After all, it's not like he could let people believe he just killed the non-sorcerers in that village because they specifically were bad. By killing his parents, he proves to others, and more importantly himself, that all those who contribute to the birth of curses are worth killing. If he can't spare his own parents, after all, then who is worthy of sparing? We see a decade later into his mission of killing all non-sorcerers that he's built an actual family for himself. And that's not just in the form of his two adopted daughters, Nanako and Mimiko, who he saved from that village all those years ago. The rest of his party of close allies in his case are also people who he refers to as family. You get the sense looking at this group of people he loves that, even if he's gone on to live a meaningless existence driven by questionably justified animosity, he has at least found some people who he believes in protecting and loving. The last scene of him speaking to Gojo before his death also shows something deeper about him. He says he never held any hate toward his fellow sorcerers at the school, but he knew he couldn't stay with them because his ideals would never line up with theirs. This to me is the truly tragic part of Geto's arc. He loved his peers and mentors at the school, but he couldn't live to see them die all the time like Haibara and Riko without trying to do something about it, as heinous as that something might have been. But what about the characters who devote themselves not to the family that they form from bonds of friendship, but the family they're born with? I don't need to spend too much time on these guys because you don't need me to tell you they suck. The Zenins are an ancient clan of sorcerers that have been cherished in Jujutsu society due to the technique their blood has the potential of holding, the Ten Shadows. The same is true of the other two big clans in the series, the Gojo and the Kamo. But aside from those two whom we don't see a lot from, the Zenin are particularly infamous for being especially conservative. They're sexist, for one thing, and also especially ruthless to the members of their family that are born without cursed energy or strong cursed techniques. We see this firsthand with Maki and Mai, who were abused and treated as servants for the large part of their life before Maki chose to leave the clan and become a sorcerer despite them. You could argue that they're not all bad since the members of the clan who do have techniques are treated extremely well, but even those who do are victims of the system in their own way. Naoya, for instance, is someone who is honored for his strength since he was a child. He hated his brothers because he perceived them as weaker than him and sought to prove that he was on the level of sorcerers like Toji and Gojo. Because if someone like Toji, who doesn't even have cursed energy, can become a ruthless fighter, then he should be able to become even stronger, right? But ultimately, his own naive expectations of grandeur end up getting the better of him when he faces Maki in a fight, and he ends up getting finished off by her mother. He dies angry and bitter, and because he wasn't killed with cursed energy, that anger ends up transforming him into a cursed spirit. My point with him is that Naoya is basically a manifestation of the Zenin's ideology, all rolled up into one self-destructive, misogynist burrito. He believes that becoming the head of the Zenin clan is what is most important in his life, so much so that he is impatient for his own father's death and contemptuous toward his brothers and cousins. His belief that Zenin blood and tradition is more important than anything ended up with him turning a blind eye toward the family he theoretically should have cherished, and underestimating the girl that killed him just based on his predetermined definition of strength. So most of the main characters in the series don't give a shit about their own born family if they have any left alive. And the one dude who believes family is genuinely important is a sexist asshole who only cares about gaining power through his family. Shit, well there has to be at least one character who cares about their family in an actually healthy way, right? That isn't any of the million dead parents or, Junpei? Don't worry, Junpei. You'll get your video eventually. Well, as a matter of fact, there is at least one character who fits the bill. Let's take a look at... We're only introduced to Choso after we see his brothers, Eso and Kechizu. While the latter two are attacking the first years, we see a flashback of Choso telling them how important it is that they put each other's lives over their own, and cherish their brothers more than anything. For context, the three are death paintings, which were stolen by Mahito along with Sukuna's fingers and subsequently incarnated by him. There are 6 others besides those 3, all the result of a gross experiment by Noritoshi Kamo, the details of which I won't dwell into. Eso and Kechizu unfortunately end up dying in the arc they're introduced in, but not before putting up a pretty entertaining fight against Yuji and Nobara. And in this scene you can see early on that even their abilities reflect their devotion to their brothers. Not only is their technique literally based on blood, but they can tell whenever any of their siblings die, as shown by Choso's reaction in this scene.
ゲト株券どうした調査早くああ駒壊すなよ
弟が死んだ。
そういうのわかるんだ
どういうことだ。受肉体ならまだしも二人が指一本分の呪霊にやられるとは思えん。
Long story short, Choso cares about his brothers more than anything, and they're absolutely his top priority above all else. He only works with the antagonist, Kenjiku, in order to create a world where his half-cursed brothers can live peacefully without the threat of sorcerers. He sticks with him anyway, even after they die, because he knows it's too risky to try to get the rest of the death paintings on his own. Choso fades into obscurity until the Shibuya arc, during which he has a fight with Yuji. This also happens to be one of the best fights in the arc, but that's besides the point. It ends with Yuji basically getting his entire liver shot out, which he survives only barely. But plot twist, Choso's brother dying sixth sense triggers at that very moment and shows him a memory of him and his brothers chilling with Yuji, implying that the two of them are related by blood. So then he fucks off and has an existential crisis. The next time we see Choso comes in the final part of the Shibuya arc, when he suddenly swoops in and confronts Kenjiku for being the presumed long-dead Noritoshi Kamo. Oh, and he also tells him to stop attacking Yuji, who he claims is his little brother. So while you might think Choso would care all about his family, especially considering the nature of his technique and his tendency to latch onto those who seem to have even a little bit of relation to him, in reality he exclusively cherishes his brothers and siblings. He despises Noritoshi Kamo in particular due to what he did to their mother during their creation. Not to mention the whole manipulating him into getting him to help with his plans and also attacking his little brother relentlessly. Technically, Yuji is his half-brother, as we see in a flashback. Yuji is the son of Jin and Kaori Itadori, the latter of which was actually possessed by Kenjiku at the time of Yuji's birth. Despite this, Choso didn't hesitate to devote himself to his one remaining brother, protecting him from Yuta and Naoya in the aftermath of Shibuya and forming an alliance with Yuji's friends in order to help them attain their goals. Choso really interests me because while he really does care about his family, the way he does so is pretty unique compared to most characters in the series. He doesn't care about any of the Kamos, or his father, or pretty much any of his relatives beyond the ones who he knows are somehow a victim of Kenjiku. He meets a brother whom he'd never met before, but still gives his entire being and abandoned his former allies. Just because he knew he needed to take on the role of protector he was born with as the eldest. And by showing that in a couple chapters, Akutami transforms Choso from a bland side antagonist to a character we as the audience genuinely care for. Hell, even rewatching the anime after reading the manga made me realize that I even kinda liked Eso and Kechizu for the same reason, just because of the added context. Now that we've covered the main bases, let's take a look at how Yuji's relationship to family develops later into the series. He still maintains that self-righteousness born from both his nature and his grandpa's last words, but he goes on to form other bonds throughout the series as well. There is of course his relationship with his classmates, and while as a shonen JJK doesn't really focus on establishing it that much, the anime does a better job in showing their friendship through added scenes and such. There's also the kind of brotherly bond he forms with Gojo as they spend more time together, exacerbated by the fact that Yuji trained with him on his own for most of the time he was playing dead. There's Nanami. If you refuse to interpret him as a father figure, then you have to at least acknowledge the fact that he's probably the most responsible adult in Yuji's life. Gojo is kind for the most part, sure, but Nanami seems to be more aware of the fact that Yuji is a literal child, one who shouldn't have to deal with the impossible burden he's saddled with from the start. Funnily enough, Yuji also internalizes Nanami's last words to him in a similar way to what he did with his grandfather's. While Nanami most likely meant the words "you've got it from here" to mean that he would be okay with Nanami gone, Yuji takes it to mean that he himself must bear the burden that Nanami left for him. Yay! And of course, there is the real family that Yuji comes to discover later in the series. I must admit that I'm personally not a big fan of the "these two characters were actually related all along" twist for the most part. The best example of this trope being utilized in media, in my opinion, is Your Turn to Die. The twist we get in the game isn't just for shock, it also adds to the story and emotions of a lot of the characters. Jujutsu Kaisen doesn't fail with this though. By revealing Yuji as Choso's brother, it presents him with the option to either acknowledge the fact or ignore it entirely. While the former comes with the added benefit of being able to accept Choso into his life, it opens up many dilemmas that he will have to face on top of this. There's the fact that Yuji helped kill Eso and Ketjizu, of course, but there's also the fact that being Choso's brother means that Kenjiku is his mother, and his entire existence was orchestrated just as another part of their plan. I suspect that Yuji will end up getting close to Choso despite this, only to have another stake of emotional trauma be driven through his heart when Choso dies, but hey, anything could happen. But looking back now, I think all of these examples are just enough to form a picture of what Akutami is trying to say about family, chosen or blood related, through this narrative. As for what that picture looks like, well, I think it's pretty fucking complicated, but if you were to boil it down to just a single phrase, it'd probably be this: hold tight to those you love and leave behind those who suck. You don't have to love someone just because you're related to them. In fact, lots of relatives can be pretty shitty, but not all of them are, so be sure to take care of the good ones. And if you can't do that, then make your own family and form your own bonds, and cherish them all the same. Or something like that, I don't fucking know. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching this. I know it's less interesting than a specific critique or something like that, but I decided it would be fun to try out something new. Sorry I don't have a better microphone yet, by the way. I'm working on that, I swear. And one more big thanks to my friends and others who supported my last video. I kinda made it on a whim, but I'm proud I'm finally making content like this. It's something I've wanted to do for a while.